Hello and welcome to your YouTube channel, Learn English Lab. Today's podcast topic name is How Americans Really Talk. So, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine studying architecture for like 10 straight years.
Oh, wow. A whole decade.
Right, a decade. You memorize every single blueprint. You learn the load-bearing capacity of every possible material. You completely master the complex physics of structural engineering.
So you're basically a genius on paper.
Totally. You are, by all academic standards, an absolute master of the craft. But then you actually walk through the front door of a house you've just bought.
Okay, I see where this is going.
And you realize you have absolutely no idea how to actually sit on the furniture. You don't know why people gather in the kitchen instead of the living room. You don't understand the unspoken rules of, like, where to leave your shoes.
Yeah, you have the technical knowledge to build the house, but zero practical lived experience of how to actually inhabit the space. Spot on. And today we are taking a deep dive into the linguistic equivalent of that exact scenario. Our mission today is decrypting the unspoken, heavily culturally loaded code of American workplace communication.
And it is such a profound shock to the system for so many professionals. What we're really examining today is this widespread phenomenon that I tend to call the C2 trap.
The C2 trap. I love that term. And just for you listening, C2 refers to the absolute highest level of proficiency in that common European framework of reference for languages.
Right. We are talking about individuals who have dedicated an immense, honestly, almost staggering portion of their lives to mastering English. They have studied for 10 to 15 years.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. They have sat through those grueling high-pressure exams, scored a 7.5 or an 8.0 on their IELTS, and they have completely conquered the architecture of the language.
Yeah, they know all the conditionals, the perfect tenses, those nuanced grammar rules that most native speakers couldn't even begin to name. Without a doubt, most native speakers would fail those tests. And yet, these brilliant people walk into their first day at an American corporate job and suddenly they feel completely, utterly, and terrifyingly lost.
Yeah, and that is the core paradox we really need to explore right off the bat. Because, I mean, if you have all the tools, why does the brain suddenly just scramble?
Well, it scrambles because it's searching for a pattern that isn't there.
Let's paint the picture for you, the listener, because this happens every single day in office buildings across the U.S. You land a respectable job, right.
You
went through like 3 rounds of interviews, you proved your competence, you are dressed perfectly, and you walk in on day 1.
The stakes are so high, you're nervous but excited.
Right. And your manager, an American, walks up to you. They have this big, warm, welcoming smile, and they hit you with something like, "Hey, just wanted to loop you in on the sync we have after lunch." Nothing major, just a quick touch base. If you could bang out those numbers before then, that would be awesome.
Oh, man. That is a nightmare sentence for a non-native speaker.
It really is. Now, if you are a C1 or C2 learner, you aren't struggling with the literal translation of those words. I mean, you know what a loop is.
Yeah, a circle.
Right. You know what it means to synchronize. But the speed, the delivery, and just the bizarre combination of concepts leave you completely frozen.
You just stand there, smiling and nodding politely.
Yeah, smiling and nodding while your internal processor completely crashes. So why does that happen?
The processor crashes because, like I said, it is searching for an academic framework that simply doesn't apply to the situation. It's crucial to understand that this is overwhelmingly a challenge for highly advanced learners, not really beginners.
Because beginners know they don't know the language yet.
Right on. The advanced learners feel betrayed. And the reason is that traditional textbooks, grammar courses, and even those IELTS exams themselves are fundamentally designed to teach a very specific, sanitized version of the language.
They teach a neutral, internationally acceptable English, right?
Spot on. The curriculum is preparing you to speak to an immigration officer, or to write a flawless academic essay for a university, or, to communicate with another non-native speaker in a global business hub like Dubai or Singapore.
So they strip all the weird stuff out.
Totally. To do that effectively, educational boards deliberately strip the language of its local color, its regional idioms, and its messy, fast-paced informality.
Which makes total sense on a global scale.
Yeah.
I mean, if textbooks included all the local color of, say, a startup in Austin, Texas, that book would be completely useless to someone trying to do business in London or Johannesburg.
That is 100% the issue. But the reality of corporate America is the furthest thing from neutral. It is highly specific, it moves at a breakneck pace, and it is densely packed with cultural assumptions.
Break it down for us. What assumptions are baked into that first day greeting?
Well, when your manager uses a phrase like loop you in, they aren't just using a casual synonym for include. They are invoking a physical action of tying someone into a continuous process.
No, interesting. And what about sync?
When they say sync, they are borrowing language directly from computer science to describe human interaction, which is a very, very American, tech-driven linguistic habit.
And touch base. Space call, right?
Yeah, it implies checking in quickly, drawing directly from baseball, a sport woven into the fabric of American childhoods, and then bang out implies a rapid, almost physical, forceful creation of work.
None of which is in any textbook.
Zero. None of this is in the standard curriculum because it is too regional, and quite frankly, it evolves way too quickly for the publishing cycle of an Oxford English textbook to ever keep up.
Okay, but wait, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
So a new employee doesn't understand a few baseball metaphors or some recycled tech jargon. Is that really a crisis?
You'd think not, right?
Yeah, like, can't they just ask for clarification and move on? It seems like a minor inconvenience, not this massive career roadblock you're making it out to be.
It might seem minor on the surface, absolutely, but it acts as a fundamental barrier to entry in the professional world. If you are constantly pausing the conversation to ask for literal translations of idioms,
Which gets annoying for everyone else.
yeah, or if you are simply sitting there silently nodding because you are too intimidated to ask, you are starting your new role at a severe, tangible disadvantage.
Because you're missing the unspoken stuff.
You are missing the subtext, the urgency, and the emotional tone of the work. To really see how this plays out, we should look at a specific, real-world case study from our research. We need to examine how this linguistic disconnect actually derails a professional's career trajectory.
Let's do that. So the case study from our research focuses on a professional named Priya. And for you listening, Priya is basically the perfect avatar for this situation. She is originally from Hyderabad, India.
Highly educated, I assume?
Oh, brilliant. Educated at a top-tier Indian university, and her English is impeccable. We're talking about someone who writes beautifully crafted emails, like flawless grammar, perfectly structured paragraphs, elevated vocabulary.
She's probably better at writing than most native speakers.
Easily. In fact, if we put her written communication up against her native-born American colleagues, Priya's grammar is arguably far superior.
That makes total sense. Native speakers rely on intuition, which is often grammatically flawed, whereas Priya relies on years of rigorous academic training.
So Priya relocates to the United States. She accepts a position at a high-paced, competitive tech company in San Francisco, and almost immediately, within the first month, she hits an indelible wall.
But not a technical one, right?
No, not at all. It's vital to note that this is not a wall of technical competence. Her coding skills are top-notch. Her project management is excellent. The wall she hits is purely a communication barrier, but it manifests in the way she literally never anticipated.
Because it's not that she can't express herself. It's that the American workplace relies heavily on this dense web of idioms that function almost like a secret club's code.
Yes, the secret code. Our research highlighted the specific opaque expressions she kept running into. She'd be at a strategy meeting, two colleagues would start debating a feature, and the manager would suddenly cut in and say, "Let's take this offline."
Oh, that's a classic.
Right. Or Priya would send a detailed proposal to her team, and a senior developer would reply, "Can you circle back on that next week?"
Another huge one.
Or during a presentation, someone would interrupt to say, "I want to piggyback on what James just said."
And we really have to look at the cognitive load this places on the non-native speaker. If you have never encountered these phrases in a cultural context, your brain attempts to translate them literally.
Which is terrifying.
Totally terrifying. Take this offline. To Priya, that means disconnecting from the internet. Does she need to unplug the router? Does she need to close her laptop?
Right, and circle back. Is she supposed to physically turn around in her chair?
Yeah, or piggyback. That is literally a children's game where you ride on someone's shoulders. When you isolate the words, they sound entirely absurd in a corporate setting.
It sounds completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
You understand every single isolated word, take this off line, but you completely miss the collective meaning.
You're just left scratching your head.
You have no idea that take this offline just means let's discuss this privately later so we don't waste the whole meeting's time, or that circle back means let's return to this topic in the future.
And piggybacking is just a collaborative way to say, I want to build upon someone else's idea.
Yeah, you are left entirely in the dark. It's like standing outside the club and just listening to the music through the walls.
That's a great analogy. The frustration for someone at Priya's level of proficiency is immense. It often leads to a feeling of betrayal. a sense that the academic institutions that train them essentially tricked them.
Like, why did anyone teach me this?
Exactly. But here is the deeper, honestly more insidious layer of the C2 trap. It is not just about Priya failing to understand the idioms. It is about how Priya herself was perceived by her colleagues when she spoke.
Oh, the perception piece. This is huge.
It is everything. Because she was deeply confused by this informal rapid-fire code, and because her primary goal was to be taken seriously as a professional, she retreated to her safe zone.
Which was her formal English.
Spot on. She relied heavily on the very formal, precise academic English she had spent 15 years mastering.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because this is where the logic just seems to break down for me. If Priya's grammar is actually better than her American colleagues, and her vocabulary is richer, why is she the one hitting a wall?
It seems backwards, doesn't it?
It totally does.
Yeah.
Shouldn't her colleagues, especially in management, look at her and appreciate her precise formal English? Shouldn't they see her formal communication and think, wow, she is incredibly articulate and professional. We need to put her in front of clients.
That is the logical assumption, for sure, but it completely ignores the anthropological reality of the American workplace.
Anthropological reality. Okay, unpack that.
If we zoom out and look at global corporate cultures, we see that in many regions, certainly in India, in much of Asia, across the Middle East, and in many parts of Europe, formality is the universal currency of respect.
Formality equals competence.
100%. It equals competence. If you speak formally, using elevated language with your superiors, you are demonstrating your education and showing deference to the organizational hierarchy.
That makes sense.
But the American workplace, particularly in modern sectors like tech, finance, or media, operates on a completely different psychological wavelength. In an American office, excessive formality does not signal respect.
What does it signal?
It actually signals that you are stiff. It signals that you are aloof, disconnected, or even arrogant.
Wow, you come across like a robot or like some sort of Victorian time traveler who accidentally walked into a San Francisco tech startup.
A Victorian time traveler, yes.
You sound like you are reading them a legal disclaimer rather than having a normal conversation.
That is the exact perception. And the most painful part of this dynamic is that her American colleagues were not being intentionally malicious.
They weren't trying to ice her out.
Not at all. They were not consciously conspiring, saying, oh, Priya is too formal, let's exclude her from the important projects. It operates entirely as an unconscious bias. They were simply trying to build a cohesive, friendly, highly informal team environment.
So they were basically trying to be nice.
Yeah, they value camaraderie and approachability. When they used slang and idioms, they were extending an invitation to join the in-group. When Priya responded with rigid, formal language, it acted as a conversational shield. It deflected their attempts at connection.
So to them, it felt like she was constantly pushing them away, even though she was desperately trying to show them respect. What an absolute nightmare.
It's a tragic miscommunication.
It really is. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, sitting at your desk right now? It means the stakes of this deep dive are incredibly high. We are not just giving you tips on how to make small talk at the water cooler.
No, this is much bigger than that.
We aren't just teaching you slang so you can sound cool. This disconnect, if left unaddressed, genuinely impedes your upward mobility. It dictates whether the leadership team perceives you as someone who, quote-unquote, belongs in the room.
Belonging in the room is everything.
Yeah, if everyone around you is speaking in a rapid, informal code to build trust, and you are speaking like an academic textbook, they will definitely respect your work output. They will hand you data to process.
But they won't promote you.
Right. They won't see you as a leader. They won't see you as someone who can seamlessly manage a team of Americans, navigate a tricky interpersonal conflict, or pitch to high-value American clients.
That is the harsh, unvarnished reality of cultural attunement. Belonging in the room isn't just about having the correct data or the right answer to the problem. It is about delivering that answer on the exact frequency that the room is tuned to receive it.
A frequency, I love that.
If you broadcast on AM and they are listening on FM, your brilliance is simply static.
Oh, there's a great analogy. You have to tune your dial. And to truly understand why this specific American frequency is so unique, we have to look outside the borders of the U.S.
We'll have to get some contrasts.
Exactly. We have to compare it to how the rest of the English-speaking world operates. Because a lot of learners think, well, English is English. But corporate English isn't a monolith. It's a whole spectrum of behaviors.
It is a vast and wildly varied spectrum. Exploring these global dialects of corporate culture is honestly the best way to highlight the unique quirks of the American system.
So let's give the listener a scenario.
Let's do it. Let's establish a standard business scenario. You are in a high-stakes meeting, you review the quarterly data, and you realize that the current marketing strategy is failing miserably.
Like total disaster.
Yes, it is bleeding money, and you need to suggest completely changing the strategy. Let's look at how this exact message is delivered across the globe.
Okay, let's start across the pond. How does this play out under the umbrella of British indirectness?
Well, in British professional culture, there is a profound, almost institutionalized layer of understatement and indirectness. This is their ultimate form of politeness and social grace.
So they don't just yell that the ship is sinking.
Definitely not. A British professional rarely attacks a problem head-on in a public forum because bluntness is often equated with aggression. So if a strategy is failing disastrously, a British colleague would never say this is failing.
What would they say?
They might lean back, look at the data, and gently say, perhaps we ought to reconsider our approach.
Perhaps we ought. It sounds so gentle. It sounds like a mild suggestion over a cup of tea, not a desperate plea to save a dying project.
It sounds mild to the untrained ear, for sure. But native British speakers are completely fluent in the subtext. They know that perhaps we ought translates directly to we absolutely must. This is an unmitigated disaster, and if we don't change course right now, we are all going down.
That is hilarious. The urgency is totally hidden.
It is hidden beneath the velvet glove of the phrasing. Another classic example from our research is a British manager reviewing a project timeline that is mathematically impossible to meet.
Oh, I know this one. They don't call it impossible, do they?
No, they won't call it impossible. They will look at it, purse their lips, and call the schedule rather ambitious.
Which is so confusing for a C2 learner, because if you translate it literally, ambitious is a positive attribute. You want to be ambitious. You want to be driven. You hear that and think, thank you, yes, I'm very ambitious. I work very hard.
Exactly, you take it as a compliment. But in the British corporate code, rather ambitious means it is completely unrealistic, bordering on delusional, and you are guaranteed to fail.
That is amazing.
They use heavy understatement to cushion the blow and save face for everyone involved. Now let's take a massive flight down to the Southern Hemisphere and look at Australia.
Okay, Australian egalitarianism. This has to be a completely different vibe from the British understatement.
It is entirely inverted. Australians favor a highly laid-back, fiercely egalitarian style. The hierarchy, at least linguistically, is completely flattened.
Give me an analogy.
Okay, to use an analogy, if the British office is a formal dining room where everyone has a specific seat, the Australian office is the front seat of an Uber. Everyone is expected to act like they are on the exact same level.
The front seat of an Uber, that's perfect.
You might walk into a major corporation in Sydney on day one and call the CEO by their first name.
Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Just like that.
To the guy making millions of dollars who controls your whole career.
Just like that. In fact, calling him Mr. Smith might actually create friction, making you seem overly subservient or awkwardly rigid.
Wow.
Furthermore, Australian corporate culture leverages a massive amount of self-deprecating humor to keep things grounded. They have a cultural aversion to the tall poppy syndrome.
Wait, what's that?
It means they do not like people who elevate themselves above the group or take themselves too seriously. So, returning to our scenario of the failing strategy, an Australian manager might look at the bleeding metrics and say, yeah, I reckon we should go a different direction, mate.
Yeah, I reckon. It's so casual. Reckoned is such a great informal way of saying I believe or I calculate. It takes all the pressure and ego out of the situation. It's just an observation.
Totally ego-free.
Okay, what about our neighbors up north? What about the Canadian Register?
Canadian corporate culture is a fascinating hybrid because it sits somewhat comfortably between the British and the American models.
Okay, so a mix of both.
Yeah, it shares many structural similarities with America. The vocabulary is largely the same, the pacing of the conversation is similar, the business structures are aligned, but there is a distinct, deeply ingrained Canadian softness.
The famous Canadian politeness.
Exactly. It is a much more apologetic, consensus-driven register. A Canadian professional will famously preface a strong disagreement or a pivot in strategy with an apology, prioritizing harmony over friction.
So how do they handle the failing strategy?
They might look at the failing data and say, sorry, but I think we might need to look at a different strategy.
Sorry, but I think. They're literally apologizing for having a differing opinion. It is incredibly collaborative, very non-confrontational, ensuring that no one feels attacked before the new idea is introduced.
It keeps everyone feeling safe.
But then we bring it back to the United States. We bring it back to the American corporate arena. In that exact same high-stakes meeting, facing the exact same failing metrics, an American colleague isn't going to say, perhaps we ought, or I reckon, or sorry, but.
Definitely not.
They are going to lean forward, project confidence, and simply say, I think we should pivot on this.
Pivot. That single word is an absolute masterclass in American corporate psychology.
I love that word. It is everywhere. You can't spend 10 minutes in an American office without hearing someone talk about pivoting.
It's inescapable.
Let's dive deep into pivot, because I don't think non-native speakers realize how much weight that tiny word actually carries.
You're touching on a deeper mechanism there. It's vital to examine why Americans rely on this specific set of workplace idioms. Pivot isn't just a simple synonym for change or alter.
Where does it come from?
It has its roots in sports, specifically basketball. In basketball, a pivot is when a player keeps one foot firmly planted on the ground while rapidly changing the direction of their body with the other foot to avoid a defender.
Oh, right. The pivot foot.
Yeah. And over the last 20 years, heavily influenced by the cultural dominance of Silicon Valley and the startup ecosystem, pivot has infected every single sector of corporate America.
But why that word?
Because it carries incredibly heavy positive cultural connotations. It implies agility. It implies innovation. It implies a kind of ruthless decisiveness.
It's brilliant framing. It makes changing your mind sound like a heroic athletic maneuver. Instead of saying, we failed, we lost the money, let's retreat, you say, we are pivoting.
Exactly.
It sounds proactive. It sounds like you were still in complete control of the game.
That is the exact psychological utility of the word. And this is why missing the subtext is so incredibly dangerous for an advanced learner. If you look at pivot in a dictionary, it might just say to turn.
Right.
If you just translate it as change, you miss the entire emotional energy of the room. If you stand up in a meeting and say, we need to alter our plans because this is failing, it sounds bureaucratic, heavy, and defeatist.
Nobody wants to hear that.
No. But if you say, we need to pivot, it sounds dynamic, forward-thinking, and deeply inherently American. If you miss the subtext of that word, you miss the value system of your colleagues. You miss the fact that agility is treated as a moral imperative in U.S. business.
This reliance on words that signal agility and innovation points to a much deeper requirement in the American office. It's not just about selecting the right vocabulary word from a list. It's about a specific type of energy you are expected to project. Every single day, you badge into that building.
It is exhausting, but required.
And this brings us to what I think is one of the most critical and honestly most exhausting concepts for any professional trying to navigate this landscape.
We are entering the territory of performative optimism.
Performative optimism. I love that phrase because it captures both the necessity and the subtle artificiality of it perfectly. Let's break this down for the listener.
Please do.
In the American workplace, there's an intense, unspoken cultural expectation that you will project unshakable confidence at all times. You must sound relentlessly upbeat, regardless of the actual circumstances.
Relentless is the right word.
And the most crucial part, you must frame every single problem, every disaster, every budget cut as an opportunity. There are no disasters in American corporate speak. There are only challenges we get to overcome. There are no failures. There are only learnings.
It is deeply ingrained in the American ethos. If you trace the sociolinguistics back, it ties directly into the foundational concept of the American dream, this culturally pervasive idea that with enough hard work, a positive attitude, and individual agency, absolutely anything is possible.
Right, the whole bootstrap mentality.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Therefore, in a business context, negativity, pessimism, or even just bleak realism is often viewed not as caution, but as a lack of creativity or a lack of drive.
Wait, I have to challenge this. Because from the outside, this sounds like it breeds a profoundly toxic culture.
Oh, it absolutely can.
If everyone is constantly forced to act like a cheerleader, how do actual systemic problems ever get solved? If the servers are on fire and you aren't allowed to say the servers are on fire, this is a disaster, doesn't that toxic positivity just mask incompetence?
That is a very common and very valid critique, especially from professionals coming from Germany or Russia, where direct, blunt realism is valued over cheerleading. But you have to view performative optimism not as a delusion, but as a required framework for problem solving.
Okay, a framework. How so?
Americans do solve the problems. They just refuse to dwell on the despair of the problem. Performative optimism is the social contract that dictates how you are allowed to present the problem.
Ah, I see.
You can announce that the servers are on fire, but you must simultaneously project the confidence that you are already holding the fire extinguisher and have a plan to upgrade the hardware next week. It's about forward momentum.
Okay, so it's about not getting bogged down in the emotional weight of the failure. That actually makes sense. Let's look at how this performative optimism manifests in everyday conversation, because it creates situations that are incredibly confusing for non-native speakers.
It really does.
Let's dissect a very specific everyday phenomenon. The phrase, "I love that idea."
Oh, this is a classic trap for the uninitiated, and it happens in conference rooms thousands of times a day. Picture this. You are in a brainstorming session. The team is trying to figure out a new marketing angle.
Okay, setting the scene.
You, the non-native speaker, pitch an idea you've been working on. Your American manager looks at you, their eyes light up, they smile broadly, and they say, "I love that idea."
Now, if I am a C2 learner from a culture that values directness, I am absolutely thrilled. I take those words at face value. I think, great, they love it. We're going into production. I am a genius, and I'm probably getting a promotion.
But then the manager takes a breath and continues. "I love that idea. What if we completely stripped it down, changed the target demographic to seniors instead of teens, and launched it next year instead of next month?"
Wait a minute. They didn't love my idea at all. They just took my idea, threw it in the garbage, lit it on fire, and suggested something completely different.
Yes, they did.
To someone from outside this culture, this sounds incredibly fake. It sounds two-faced. It sounds like the American manager is a liar who is just playing mind games. But if we dig into the psychology, it's actually not malicious, is it?
It is genuinely not disingenuous. This is where the learner has to aggressively separate their own cultural lens from the American cultural lens. In America, saying, "I love that idea," before introducing a completely conflicting, opposing idea is not a lie.
What is it then?
It is a vital conversational lubricant. It is a culturally mandated way of saying, "I validate your participation. I appreciate the intellectual energy you brought to this table, and I want to maintain our positive working relationship, even though I fundamentally disagree with your premise."
Wow. There's a lot of subtext for four little words.
It is. It cushions the blow of the rejection and keeps the performative optimism intact.
It's the performative optimism in action. Because if the manager just looked at you and said, "No, that won't work," which is perfectly acceptable in Amsterdam or Berlin, it kills the positive energy of the American room.
It ruins the vibe.
Right. It creates friction. So they validate the act of sharing the idea to encourage you to keep sharing, even as they reject the idea itself.
That's it. And once you understand that rule book, the resentment fades. It becomes second nature. You stop taking, "I love that idea," literally. You don't start planning the victory party.
You just wait for the but.
Yeah, you start hearing it for what it functionally is. A polite, encouraging transition into a completely different direction.
So this brings us all the way back to the paradox of formality we mentioned earlier with Priya. Let's look at a hyper-exaggerated comparison to really drive this concept home for the listener.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you are in a team Slack channel, or like a Microsoft Teams chat. Your team leader posts a message. "Hey everyone, the new project brief just dropped. Sounds good, let me run with that."
Let's pause and run with that. Another incredibly common, highly kinetic, athletic idiom, meaning to take enthusiastic ownership and charge of a task.
Right. It's casual, it's fast, it's full of momentum. Now, imagine you, the highly educated, perfectly grammatically correct English learner, reply in that same group chat with, "I shall endeavor to complete the task at the earliest convenience."
Oh my goodness, the contrast is absolutely jarring.
It's hilarious. You sound like a butler from an 1800s period drama replying to a surfer. And the core issue is, while your sentence is grammatically flawless, I mean, there is nothing technically wrong with "I shall endeavor," it signals a massive, glaring lack of social awareness.
It really does.
You are completely misreading the room. You are wearing a tuxedo to a beach volleyball game.
And this is the pivot point where the advanced learner must evolve. Once you hit that C1 or C2 level, the goal is no longer perfect, rigid grammar. The goal is no longer memorizing vocabulary lists.
What's the new goal?
The new goal, the ultimate objective, is what sociolinguists call calibrated informality.
Calibrated informality. That is the secret sauce. Let's define that clearly, because that is the tightrope we are asking the listener to walk.
Calibrated informality is the sophisticated ability to be casual enough to build genuine rapport, warmth, and trust with your colleagues while remaining precise and articulate enough to demonstrate your deep professional expertise.
It's definitely a tightrope.
It is. If you lean too far into the casual side, using too much slang you don't fully grasp, using poor grammar intentionally, or being overly familiar, you might not be taken seriously as a senior expert.
You sound unprofessional.
Right. But if you lean too far into the formal side, you become Priya. You are aloof, disconnected, and excluded from the inner circle.
So it's about blending the two. It's mixing high-level, precise technical vocabulary regarding your actual work, the engineering, the finance, the legal aspects, but wrapping those complex thoughts in a casual, conversational, accessible delivery.
That is the formula, and I would argue that mastering this balance, true calibrated informality, is the single most sophisticated thing a non-native speaker can achieve.
It sounds incredibly difficult.
It is exponentially harder than memorizing a list of obscure SAT vocabulary words. It requires deep, active listening, high emotional intelligence, empathy, and remarkable social agility.
Okay, so understanding this concept of calibrated informality, understanding the exhausting necessity of performative optimism, realizing that idioms are a secret code. I mean, that is all fantastic theory.
It's good to know the why.
It's great to understand the why. But theory doesn't survive contact with the enemy, right? Theory doesn't help you on a Monday morning stand-up meeting when your boss asks for an update.
Fair point.
So let's pivot to the how. How does the listener actively apply this to their own daily work life? Let's build a concrete step-by-step action plan for cultural attunement.
Okay, the very first step in this action plan requires a moment of genuine, perhaps uncomfortable introspection. We need to address what I call the communication blind spot.
The blind spot. Tell me more.
I want the listener to ask themselves this direct question. When you are communicating at work, especially in high-stress situations, are you communicating in a style that feels safe and correct to you, or are you dynamically adapting to the culture around you?
Man, that is a brutally tough question to answer, honestly. Because human nature, especially when speaking a second language, is to cling to what feels safe, like a life raft.
It's a survival instinct.
You spent 10 years having teachers drill into your head that I shall endeavor is correct,
Right.
and gets you an A on the test. So when you are nervous in a meeting, it feels safe to retreat to that academic language. You feel protected by the rules of grammar.
You do. But the chasm between your internal self-perception, where you think, I sound incredibly professional and smart, and the external perception of your American colleagues who are thinking they sound incredibly stiff and robotic, is a massive blind spot.
And it sabotages careers.
Yes. The silver lining is that the moment you are made aware of a blind spot, it ceases to be a blind spot. You can now start actively monitoring your own output.
So let's give them the actual tools to fix it. Strategy number 1 in our action plan: workplace power phrases. I love this one because it's highly actionable. You can start doing this today.
It's very practical.
We want you to start actively collecting phrases that signal you are part of the in-group. Now, to be clear, we are not telling you to start using useful slang. Don't go into a meeting and say things are lit or bussin'.
Please don't do that.
These power phrases are structural, transitional phrases that American professionals use to navigate the complex social dynamics of meetings smoothly.
Let's role-play some concrete examples so the listener can hear the difference. Imagine a scenario where someone is presenting a complex data set, and you simply do not understand their conclusion.
Okay.
In a more direct culture, you might just say, I don't understand, or that doesn't make sense.
Which is honest.
It is honest, but in an American meeting, that sounds abrasive. It sounds like an attack on the presenter's clarity. Instead, an American will use a power phrase to soften the interruption. They will say, just to clarify, before asking their question. Just to clarify, are those numbers for Q3 or Q4?
Just to clarify. It's so subtle, but it completely shifts the burden. It says, we are all smart people here, I just need a tiny bit of illumination, rather than, you are confusing me.
Exactly the vibe.
Okay, how about when you agree with someone, but you have a new idea you want to introduce? In a textbook, you'd say, I agree with you. Furthermore, I propose. Oh, it sounds like a UN summit. What's the American power phrase?
You use a phrase that emphasizes collaboration. You say, that is a great point, and to build on that.
To build on that. I hear that constantly. It's fantastic because it is deeply collaborative.
Yeah.
It visually implies you are taking their brick and adding your brick on top to build a house together.
It shows you are a team player.
It shows you are actively listening and adding value rather than just waiting impatiently for your turn to speak. Okay, one more.
Yeah.
What about when a problem comes up in a meeting that is totally off topic and you can't solve it right now? Instead of saying, I will remember this for later, or we must delay this, what do you say?
You use a highly visual, proactive idiom. You say, I will flag that for the team, or let's put a pin in that.
I will flag that. It's great. You are planting a literal flag on the issue so you don't lose it. So the strategy is to collect these power phrases, keep a list on your phone.
Right.
But, and this is a massive warning, we have to talk about the friction of implementing them.
Awkward phase.
Yeah. You can't just memorize a list of 20 idioms and vomit them all out in your 10 a.m. stand-up meeting.
That is a crucial caution, and it brings up the issue of imposter syndrome. If you, the formal C2 speaker, suddenly walk into a meeting and say, just to clarify, I want to piggyback on that idea, run with it, and flag it for the team so we can touch base and pivot, it will sound incredibly unnatural.
It will sound like you are malfunctioning.
It will sound like you are mocking them or having a linguistic breakdown. The psychological friction here is that trying new phrases feels deeply inauthentic. You feel like you are faking a personality.
Exactly. You feel like an actor in a bad play. So how do you overcome that imposter syndrome?
The strategy is gradual, almost microscopic integration. Pick one or two phrases a week, just one or two. Write them on a sticky note. Make it a goal to naturally, casually insert, just to clarify, into a low-stakes conversation on a Tuesday.
Just once.
Just once. It will feel weird the first time, but by Friday, your brain will have mapped that phrase to that social situation, and it will start to feel like yours. You are building linguistic muscle memory.
Start small. I love
Okay.
that. Strategy number 2. This is about much more than just the words you choose. This is about the music of the language. We need to talk about energy, pacing, and rhythm.
Oh, this is fascinating. If you observe an American conversation, especially a professional collaborative one, you will notice a very specific underlying cadence. It's almost musical.
How so?
Americans tend to respond to each other very quickly. There is very little dead air or comfortable silence. But more importantly, they affirm the speaker constantly. As someone is talking, the listener is not quiet. The listener is actively participating with a stream of micro-affirmations.
Filtering a
Yeah, absolutely, totally, for sure, right? Wow.
This is a huge culture shock. Because in so many cultures, like Japan, for instance, or parts of Northern Europe, still, focused listening is the ultimate sign of deep respect.
You do not interrupt the speaker with noises.
Right. But in America, if you are silently staring at someone while they talk, their anxiety spikes. They think you are either confused, deeply angry, or your internet connection literally froze in real life. You have to give them that continuous verbal feedback loop.
Totally, absolutely, yeah.
And this requirement for constant rhythmic connection brings us to a highly misunderstood topic: the use of filler words.
Yes. Filler words. I mean, so in a lot of traditional English classes, if you use a filler word, a teacher will aggressively correct you with a red pen. They hate them.
They tell you that filler words make you sound uneducated, unprepared, or uncertain. They train you to eliminate them completely.
Which is a fundamental, almost tragic misunderstanding of how the English language operates in real time among native speakers.
Tell us why.
In the American office, these filler phrases, are rarely, if ever, signs of uncertainty. They are rhythmic devices. They act as essential bridges between complex thoughts.
They keep the beat going.
Exactly. They keep the conversational momentum going, holding the floor while the speaker formulates their next point. They prevent that dreaded, awkward American silence.
I always compare it to the hi-hat cymbal on a drum kit. The drummer isn't hitting the hi-hat because they forgot how to play the snare drum. They are hitting it to keep the beat alive between the big hits.
I love that analogy.
So, we looked at the data, and it just didn't make sense. It flows, it breathes, it sounds human.
Yeah.
So here's my challenge to you, the listener. Record yourself.
Oh, it's a tough exercise.
It is, but it's worth it. The next time you are on a low-stake Zoom call, or even just practicing a presentation alone in your room, record the audio on your phone. Then force yourself to listen back to it. Ask yourself honestly, do you sound like a corporate employee engaged in a rhythmic human exchange, or do you sound like someone reading slowly and painfully from a phrase book?
You need to feel the music of the language, not just read the sheet music.
That is an excellent way to put it. Now, moving to strategy number 3. If you do that recording and realize you sound robotic, you can't fix it in a vacuum. You need external input. This might be the most powerful tool of all. Finding a communication mentor.
Yes, stepping outside of your own head and getting real, targeted feedback from someone inside the culture.
Exactly. Find a trusted American colleague. Not your boss, and not someone you are directly competing with for a promotion. Find someone you have a decent, friendly rapport with. And you simply ask them for honest feedback on your communication style.
But, and this is critical, you have to frame the request correctly. You don't just walk up to them and say, "Is my English bad?"
Right, because if you ask it like that, it puts them in a terrible position. They will instantly panic, get defensive, and say, no, your English is perfect. Don't worry about it. Because they don't want to be mean, and they're terrified of sounding xenophobic. You will get zero actionable advice.
100%. You have to remove their anxiety about offending you. To do that, we recommend using a very specific script. You approach your colleague and you say, "Hey, I am working on making my communication style feel more natural in this specific environment. I want to make sure I'm hitting the right tone with the team. If you ever notice anything that sounds off or overly formal or just not how you guys would say it, I would genuinely appreciate a heads up."
That script is absolute gold. Let's look at why it works so well. First, you are explicitly giving them permission to critique your style, your tone, not your intelligence or your underlying grammar.
Right, it lowers the stakes for them.
Second, you are framing it as a proactive professional development goal. You are showing ambition. And here is the secret psychology behind this tactic.
Yeah.
Asking for this kind of honest, nuanced feedback actually heavily flatters the colleague.
It undeniably flatters them. It communicates several positive things at once. It shows that you value their specific expertise, that you have observed how well they communicate, and most importantly, that you trust them enough to be vulnerable.
It builds a really powerful interpersonal bond.
It does. And practically speaking, having someone point out your blind spots in real time is invaluable. If you send an email draft to your mentor and they say, "Hey, instead of saying, 'I shall endeavor to complete this,' just write, 'I'm on it," that single micro interaction will accelerate your cultural adaptation faster than 6 months of studying idioms alone in your apartment.
You are basically crowdsourcing your cultural attunement. I love it. Okay, strategy number 4, authentic media consumption. We hear this all the time from learners. People always say, "Oh, I learned English by watching Friends," or "I watch The Office every night to understand American business culture."
And that is a fundamental, sometimes disastrous mistake if your ultimate goal is C-suite level professional communication.
Wait, really? Why is that a mistake?
Because sitcoms are meticulously scripted for comedic effect. They rely on exaggerated misunderstandings, hyper-casual, often dated slang, and completely unrealistic pacing. Characters in sitcoms are designed to be dysfunctional.
Oh, right.
If you speak to your boss or your clients the way characters speak on a sitcom, you will run into severe professional trouble. You will sound ridiculous.
You definitely don't want to sound like Michael Scott in a board meeting.
Yeah.
So ditch the sitcoms. If they want to absorb the real cadence of American business, what should they be tuning into instead?
You need to consume media where professionals are speaking spontaneously, but when the stakes are incredibly high. Tune in to panel discussions from major industry conferences on YouTube.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Listen to long-form podcast interviews where CEOs or marketing directors are discussing their actual strategies. And perhaps the most unfiltered, raw source of corporate American English. Listen to publicly available quarterly earnings calls.
Oh, earnings calls are an absolute goldmine. They are the ultimate masterclass. If you listen to an earnings call, you hear the CEO projecting that mandatory performative optimism, even when the quarterly numbers are terrible and the stock is dropping.
You hear exactly how they spin it.
You hear the financial analyst asking pointed, aggressive questions, but softening them using calibrated informality. You hear exactly how they pivot, how they promise to touch base, and how they plan to circle back in real, unscripted, high-pressure environments.
By immersing yourself in that specific auditory environment, you aren't just memorizing vocabulary words. You begin to passively absorb the cadence, the pacing, the rhythm, and the tone.
It seeps into your brain.
It does. Your brain starts to internalize the secret code without you even realizing it. You start to anticipate the music.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have completely unpacked the C2 trap and the illusion that perfect grammar equals perfect communication.
We really broke that down.
We've explored the danger of the formality trap through Priya's story. We traveled the global spectrum of corporate English to see how unique the U.S. really is. We dissected the exhausting necessity of performative optimism. And we built a concrete 4-step action plan to help you achieve true calibrated informality.
We covered a lot.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? right now as you digest all of this?
It means it is time for a profound mindset shift regarding what it actually means to be fluent.
Exactly. I want to reassure you directly. You already have the hardest part handled. Seriously, if you are listening to this deep dive, following this complex analysis and understanding the nuances we are discussing, your grammar is already elite.
Your foundation is rock solid.
Your vocabulary is incredibly rich. You have put in the thousands of hours, the stressful months, the long years of study. You own the blueprint to the house. What comes next is not about studying harder. It is not about buying another grammar workbook.
Please don't buy another workbook.
Right. It is entirely about cultural attunement. It's about adjusting the dials on the dashboard you already own.
And as we look to the future, I want to leave you with a completely new thought to mull over, something that proves why mastering this face-to-face informality is more critical now than ever before.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
We are entering an era where AI and autocorrect tools like ChatGPT or Grammarly are composing our emails and reports. These AI tools are programmed to default to neutral, polite, formal, perfectly grammatical English.
Okay, yeah.
Because of this, written corporate communication is becoming entirely homogenized. Everyone's emails will soon sound perfectly formal and perfectly identical.
Wow. That changes the game completely. Because if everyone's emails are perfect, flawless grammar is no longer a differentiator. It's just the baseline.
Precisely. When the AI handles the formal text, face-to-face interaction, the messy, rhythmic, idiom-filled reality of a live meeting becomes the final frontier.
The only way to stand out.
Your ability to deploy calibrated informality in real time, to joke, to pivot, to build rapport, that becomes the only way to prove you possess high-level social intelligence. It becomes the only way to prove you truly belong in the room.
That is so powerful.
So when you give yourself permission to sound less like a textbook and more like a person, you aren't losing your professional identity. You aren't dumbing down your English. You are actually translating your true, hard-earned competence into a frequency that your new environment can finally hear and reward.
I love that.
So the ultimate question remains, are you brave enough to drop the armor of perfect grammar and embrace the messy, vulnerable rhythm of real human connection?
That is the perfect provocative question to end on. It takes courage to step away from the safety of the textbook and into the messy reality of the room, but the rewards are career-defining. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden codes of communication. And remember, to keep improving your cultural attunement and to get more content just like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. See you next time.